Hello everyone, welcome to Trends on Tuesday. This week I'm going to answer some questions that have come up actually over the past year, and I think they've all come from Oscar Paisley. About a year ago I had some cars on the layout here, and Oscar wanted to know what they were and what the loads were on them, what their function was. And I said at that time I would do a video on it fairly quickly. A year later I haven't done that video yet. My apologies, Oscar. And in the meantime he has asked questions about a couple of other cars, or one other type of car that is related to the first question. So we're going to talk today about bulkhead flat cars and center beam cars. So first of all, we'll get my coffee out of the way. Take a sip. So there we have a 50-foot flat car. And there we have a bulkhead flat car. Basically the same thing as a flat car, except permanent bulkheads mounted on each end. That one's a 50-foot. This is 62 feet 6 inches between the bulkheads. So that, Oscar, is what those cars were. And you also mentioned the loads on them that seemed interesting, and you wondered what they were and what these cars were used for. Well, during the 1970s, when I first came here, through the 1980s and into the 1990s, these cars were used for hauling lumber products, forest products, finished wood. And that comes in various sizes. I'll look for a few different ones here. There we go. So the lumber was made up into bundles, such as this. That's an 8-foot, that'd be a 10-foot, and I think this was a 12-foot or a 16-foot, maybe. Yeah, 16-foot. So this is what we see in the real world, and we still see them today. 4 feet wide, various lengths, and I think they are about 2 feet high, these stacks of lumber. Now, loading these onto this type of car was somewhat difficult. All done with forklifts. But first thing, you had to put what we call dunnage down, which is boards that the forklift can go between and get underneath the lumber. So that had to go down. The center line had to be set, and the first row of lumber stacks had to go against the center line. The center line, or the stacks of lumber, were separated vertically, again with wood, and that'll show up on the loads here. Let's bring in some loads. So there we go. There's a load. JB Lumber from Williams Lake, BC, on a British Columbia Railway bulkhead flat car. When these were loaded, the rules stated that they had to stagger. You could not stack them vertically. They had to stagger to help lock them into place. Separated by vertical posts, and each level banded, steel banded, to the next level. And then they were secured into the car down through the stake pockets at the bottom. Worked very well. A lot of lumber got shipped on these things. As for the models here, well, I showed you these little blocks here. These are all individual wood blocks and paper wraps on them, printed paper wraps. I sat and made a ton of these things. That's just a couple of them, 3 of them. I have enough for about 5 or 6 cars, maybe more, 7 or 8 cars. Anyway, there they are. The loads on these models just sit there. They sit there and they go round and round and round the layout just fine. You can see the separation. The separation was important, so when the forklift went in to pick them up and remove them, it didn't get the forks underneath the other side and flip them off the other side as it lifted. Doesn't want to go back in there. There we go. So, bulkhead flat cars. Nowadays, these are not used for lumber, or very, very rarely used for lumber. So what we see nowadays on them is loads such as concrete sleepers, ties, sheet steel, really heavy sheet steel. We'll see cars go by with those sort of things on, and various other loads. I mean, you might get a road vehicle secured in between the bulkheads there, you know, being moved. So various open loads. Now, that was the first question. The second question relates to this type of car. I'm going to move that back onto the next track. I think that's where the focus is. In 1985, I took my family down to the US, crossed over the border at Sumas, BC, and just across the border I came across one of those. Just like that, Burlington Northern in green, and I thought, wow, what on earth is that? And so I took a photograph of it, and since then these sort of things have taken over. This was an early one, again about 62, I think they extended it to 63 feet between the bulkheads, and if you look in there closely you can see the ribs, the vertical ribs in the center here. And I'll tilt the car a little bit, and hopefully you can see that there are ribs in the flooring as well. Permanently built-in ribs, steel, and the center beam, or the ribs in the center beam, are tapered. Somewhat like that. They are tapered. And the ribs on the floor also slope inwards to provide a 90-degree angle at the base. That allows the loads to go in at an angle instead of upright. So everything's leaning in towards the center of the car. Easier to load and quicker to load. These cars came with, or come with, winches all the way down the sides with steel cables on, and the steel cables can lock into slots built into the vertical posts. So much less work involved in loading and unloading lumber onto these cars. As I say, that's an early one. We call this the opera window style, and they are still around, but they have been extended out to around 73 feet in length now, from the original 63 foot length. Let's get that one out of the way. The whole idea, well, part of the idea in doing this was to reduce the weight of the car. There is no main center sill on these cars. Well, after the opera window one came along, then came what we call the lattice frame. So there you can see again, far more airspace through here, and yet still stable and secure for carrying these lumber loads. So that again is a short one, and here I'll bring in behind it is the current modern day one, a 73 foot. So this is what we see mostly nowadays, a 73 foot lattice frame center beam car. As for loads, we don't use the small individual blocks for making up loads for these. Nowadays we have just a single block of wood for each side, printed paper loads on, and there we have it. They just sit on there, and they're sloping towards the center. They sit there stable as anything. Canoe lumber, that one. That's a sawmill that's about 70 miles east of here. So that's one method. And other than that, I think it's Walthers produces plastic ones, completely hollowed out plastic ones, tabs there and holes there. You just tuck those into place, press them together in there, and there's a load. Tolko sawmill. Now that's right here in town, in Kamloops. Problem with these ones is once you press them together, it's almost impossible to get them apart again. I spent a lot of time filing down the holes, or the pins, so that I'd be able to pop these off again. And I'm going to have trouble now because I've just pressed them together a little bit too much. Anyway, we'll forget about that. We'll move on. Another thing we see loaded on these things nowadays quite often, we will see plastic wrapped blocks of styrofoam insulation, very lightweight loads, and also they get used for hauling various sizes of pipe, plastic pipe. Now the pipe is built up into 4 foot wide crates, and forklift on here, strap down, and away they go. I do have a couple of sets of long plastic pipe there, but basically that's what we see, except it's got some wooden framing on it to keep the pipe work all together as it's loaded. So I think that basically covers everything here, and we'll take a look at some real life pictures and video of some of these cars in action. Just before we go, I apologize, I stuck my hands in front of the camera and tried to show you the way the loads sit in the car, and I've noticed that I got my hands in the wrong place. Anyway, this is basically what I was trying to show. In the old flat cars, the bulkhead flat cars, the loads would be upright in there like that. But due to the design of the bulkhead flat cars, or the lattice frame center beam cars, they are sloped inward. The loads are sloped inward towards each other like that. So gravity helps to hold the load in place. Okay, we'll take a look at those real cars. This is at the reload center, where Lumber is trucked in from the various sawmills and offloaded prior to being reloaded onto the rail cars ready for shipment. So there's a look at bulkhead flat cars and center beam cars. Unfortunately, I didn't encounter any real-life bulkhead flat cars this past week, so I didn't have any pictures or video of those. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye for now.